So, hello and welcome to the CMIP Panel Debate Theatre here at NAB Show 2022. We have an all-star panel to talk about lessons learned from the pandemic. So to kick it off, let's get our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Javier.
Hello, my name is Javier Reyes Gomez. I'm head of contribution strategy for Appear.
Todd.
So my name's Todd Scott. I lead our collaboration business for service provider, which also includes media for Cisco systems. So I'll hand it over to Larry.
I'm Larry Thaler. I'm the CEO of VCC. We are a vendor that provides solutions for remote production, specifically from smartphones and laptops.
Mike. And I'm Mike Sid, Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of WIP Media. We have a combination of cloud-based workflow solution products and first-party data television engagement products.
I think we're all glad to be back in Vegas with humans, wearing trousers, you know. It's a great experience. And I'm not going to denigrate the pandemic. It was a hard time for all of us. People lost. But we have learned things during what has been a trying couple of years. Javier, are there any trends or surprises or emerging activities that the pandemic has highlighted for you?
Yeah, so we have seen that remote production has really gone from technology to explore something that some people had deployed, but it was a bit of a experimental thing or something that only used niche to need something that it has to be done to be able to produce content, especially with people sitting at home bored, finding something to watch on TV. So then this production has to be done with all the limitations that the pandemic brought. So then certain technologies that were there, but maybe they were not that experimented and tested, were immediately taken and brought into the systems, and they found out that it works actually. So that's been one of the learnings of the pandemic, at least in the area of the industry where we work.
Completely agree, Todd.
Yeah, so I think similar to what Javier mentioned, Cisco's obviously been a pioneer in the hybrid work environment for some time. For us during the pandemic, it was really nothing new from our personal employees. But what we wanted to do was share that with our customers. And as Javier mentioned, we found use cases that we didn't even know existed, particularly in the media space, by leveraging some of our technologies like WebEx, like our WebEx devices, purpose-built devices for video conferencing. So when we were talking about OTT and the huge demand, I think all of us can probably raise our hand and say during a period of time, whether or not we had our kids at home streaming Netflix nonstop or we had them doing remote learning, we all saw stresses on our networks, and we're competing for that given bandwidth. And so we really looked at we had to look at ourselves and say, how do we improve our products? How do we allow more people to engage using video conferencing for other use cases across multiple industries, including the media space? So, we were proud at Cisco to say we already had a product on the market. We just made some tweaks to make it better for remote production and other types of use cases that we saw during the pandemic.
When I spoke to Larry a few years back, you were talking about mobile being the next big thing. Who knew a global pandemic was going to turn up?
It's
like you knew, Larry.
Yeah. So we're sitting here at the Connected Media Pavilion, and 90% of the booths here think of this as a consumption device, and we've been talking about it as a contribution device for the past 7 years. And what's really kind of neat about what happened with the pandemic is people who would never put Teams on the air started putting Teams and Skype and other conferencing apps on the air. And that any port in a storm, I think that's the expression, right? And what happened was over time those grew and they grew and they grew and they grew. And the pandemic might be manageable now, but the need for IP remotes has not gone away. And what's happened is those processes need to get to a place that's going to be mature, that they can fit into their operations, that the quality will be improved, and that their teams won't be using kind of jury-rigged kind of solutions. And that's where we come in, because this is what we've been doing for such a long time.
Yeah. I know we were always going to go to Remy as like a go-to, but Mike, it's not just been about remote production, has it?
Oh no, actually, I think if you take a look at what's been fascinating for me about sort of the impact of the pandemic has been kind of the cascade, of sort of immediate workflow things within our industry and how that's affected things, in a larger sense. Because everybody, of course, when the lockdowns came, was driven to watch the streaming services, was driven to watch things, on television, but production shut down. So eventually, you kind of get through all that stuff after month one of the pandemic, and then what happens, right? Now, because there's no, more production's kind of shut down, the pipeline's closed, and, all of a sudden there's this mad frenzy to acquire finished content. There's this mad frenzy to create fast channels, AVOD services, and just have a lot more content out there. So I think you see this crazy sort of acceleration of the ecosystem that just sort of like a year's pandemic equals 10 years of acceleration of different business models. And I think that's been kind of fantastic. And then trying to do business at that faster pace, as as all of you guys have been involved in that, that changes everything, not just in remote production, but how we work, not just with our own companies, but with other companies. Because you're trying to do this, you need to collaborate, you need to sell products, you need to buy products. How do you do all that?
We can't avoid remote production. The growth of remote production was just like nothing I've ever seen. In the UK, we had shows that had gone from studio-based to studio-based with contributors via Zoom to completely remote. It was stunning, but there were challenges. I mean, Xavier, are there any sort of moments where you thought, wow, how do we get over this challenge now?
Yeah, so and we've seen that, as I say, there were certain technologies that were out there, but since the production companies, service providers had not done that move or that transition, that adoption of those technologies, I think there was a moment of a bit of shaky feeling of what's going to happen. We have to solve it, and then the learning or the positive thing is that, for example, I can give you an example of using contribution of content or sending the content from a stadium to a studio over the internet using technologies like SRT, and how much that has gone from a niche, I'm not so sure if I should use this, to let's go all in for it. Now we don't talk about anything else. Yeah. It's one of the technologies that is really there. And
scale as well. SRT for the occasional tier 2 type environment, but SRT as a mission critical scalable environment was a real groundbreaking moment.
It is.
Connectivity had to change. I mean, you guys, very well known both in the broadcast space and networking space, but I'm guessing you now had organizations that had to massively scale out very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that. I could speak from the collaboration perspective. Obviously, we were at a point where we could scale to meet demand. I mean, we saw overnight that WebEx video traffic doubled, tripled in some cases, depending on the area of the globe. And so from a remote production perspective, again, people were trying to figure out, what do we do? How do we bring teams together? How do we normally have people that are sitting in a studio or sitting on a lot or in a production facility that are now, doing work from home. And again, we were very familiar and very comfortable with that mode of work, being Cisco. And so, we took WebEx and we had our challenges, right? Because we had some people that were taking video streams from WebEx where maybe the quality wasn't exactly what they wanted to put on air or what they wanted to use in production. Or maybe they looked and said, well, there's icons on the bottom of the screen. Why do my viewers want to see a mute button? Or why do they care that there's 15 participants on this call, right? So, it challenged us to make sure that we gave those types of controls back to our users and back to our administrators that are helping from a potentially a corporate office to help manage some of that. More importantly, our transition to SaaS is one thing, but we still do have a healthy hardware business, even on the video conferencing front. I brought one of our newest devices to the booth today to show that, we can do the 4K quality and still use some of the traditional hardware devices to accomplish that. And they're very portable today, very affordable as well. And so we saw that multiple examples from like Ellen DeGeneres and the Jimmy Kimmel Show, and you guys have probably seen on CNN, powered by WebEx, right? There's a lot of examples where it was very successful, and it continues to be.
It's interesting to see that there was lots of talent who suddenly had broadcast studios in their back bedrooms. I think I watched a season of Jon Stewart from his attic while he talked to a sea captain. I mean, it was a bit surreal. I mean, Larry, I hate to say this, but you guys were a little bit prescient on this.
Yeah.
Were there any things that surprised you as well about the adoption of consumer devices in production workflows?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing that people don't really realize when they're trying to set up a remote from a smartphone is when you send out a remote with a crew, you have a crew at the end, and you have somebody setting up the phone. When you're setting it up with a smartphone, you don't have a crew. No. So who is your crew? It's the subject. Your subject, who maybe their house just burned down, or they're a refugee in Ukraine, right? Are they going to know the terms pan, tilt, zoom? Are they going to know how to download an app on their phone? Well, so what we learned was that the key here is to make it really, really simple for them. We had a customer who started using Skype at the beginning of the pandemic. And this is a big news organization, and they do something approaching 25,000 feeds a year using the system, and they were getting buried by people who didn't know their Skype name or couldn't figure out whether it was Skype for Business or Skype, and the amount of time they were spending doing this. They brought us in. They saved more than 20 minutes on average per feed, and now they're doing 25,000 remotes on our platform.
Wow. I always love customer stories because you all work with hundreds of customers, thousands of customers potentially. Mike, are there any examples that you think back to over the last couple of years where there was something innovative or a challenge that was overcome that sticks in the mind that you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so during this, ironically, just immediately prior to the pandemic and lockdown, we had strategically planned to build a new virtual marketplace for content, so driven by data. And this is before the pandemic, before the lockdown. So our product development, went on through that, and then we had to go and launch it, into the marketplace. So you would think, all right, CAN is shut down, MIP is shut down, NATP is shut down. This would be like the perfect time to launch a virtual marketplace for content where acquisition folks and content sales folks could kind of get together. And one of the big ironies that we had was that obviously we were able to reach out to people and try to launch this remotely because it seemed very well into the times. The weird irony is that the most traction we got was when those shows like MIPCOM and MIP TV started to open back again, and we were able to actually attend those and meet with hundreds of content buyers and sellers and show them a way that they didn't, that they could supplement what they were doing. That's where we actually began to get enormous amounts of traction.
Ironic.
Which is an incredible,
yes.
irony in that. And I think what it hits at, right, is kind of what we're seeing here, right? You can do all this, obviously remote production is a little different, but you can do all this sort of remote work, in general, but there still needs to be some sort of human touch points because trust is what's established, in person, especially for new products and things like that. That's why people do launches, even remote trust, where people see you in a webcast or something like that, but see you amongst other people seeing it. It's a legitimization factor that, it's probably something primal, right? It's something that is just in us, and and how trust gets built.
Well, Todd, Javier, are there any examples that you can share? And we have to change the names of the customers. I accept that you can share that surprised you or Javier, any innovation surprises from customer perspective that shone through?
I actually have a nice example of this was a customer or project we're working on actually still today for esports, where they surprisingly have 35 different languages of studios with commentators analyzing what's going on that 35. Each studio is a green screen virtual studio that requires all the virtual graphics to be built there. So they showed me the video of the amount of racks after racks of equipment that had to be shipped to the location where the competition was happening to be able to generate all these languages or different shows analyzing what's going on. And here is where remote production kind of changes completely the landscape. So now what we are working is on each country will have their green screen studio, will bring the content into a central place where you have your rack of servers to create all the graphics.
Yeah.
And then you're good to go and send it to the broadcast to the different countries around the world.
And it worked.
And it worked. Using the internet, by the way.
You know, Javier, you should have partnered with Cisco, right? So through WebEx, we have virtual backgrounds. We also have the real-time translation.
Always be selling. Always be selling.
To help with some of that. No, I mean, I think, you know, from my perspective, again, I traditionally had focused on just general business use and reimagining what WebEx and our products and services could do. So, I mean, I think as we looked across and customers were challenging us and giving us, you know, these problems and we're having to solve these, I mean, that was the biggest lesson for me, right? And again, you know, I think we all took it for granted that this remote work, this hybrid work, how we, you know, partner and team together and accomplish things. You know, we saw just a plethora of different, you know, examples where it was challenging our technology to provide something different. And, you know, I think that's the biggest thing for me, and you know, multiple examples. Again, I mentioned a couple of them already. You know, more importantly, we wanted to make sure, and this is really where we're driving towards, which is to give everybody an inclusive feeling on any of our meetings, right? And so if you're a participant of WebEx, regardless if you're sitting in the audience like you are today, and we use some of our purpose-built devices that pick up everybody's individual faces, traditionally you would look and see an audience, right? And now we can actually take and frame that to an individual to bring everybody in. You may be at home, you may be in a coffee shop, I may be calling you from a car, you may be part of the audience, but everybody now has an equal participation.
And that ability to be seamless, particularly for organizations that are distributed, is so incredibly important. Nobody wants to feel excluded because they're working from home, or excluded because they're working from the office, which might be. I know you've got some examples of some customers.
You were talking about innovation and tying to the seamless. One of our customers is the International Emmy Awards. And we did this 2 years ago when it was full pandemic, and we had 40 award winners that had to be brought in remotely onto their program to get their awards. And these were in 6 different continents, 40 different countries, and we got them all on, and it was, they liked it so much they brought us back the next year when they had a event in person here in New York. Well, not here in New York, there in New York, and it was a hybrid event. Some of the award winners still couldn't travel, but there was a room with 500 people in it that was packed with tables, and they needed a way to shoot the award winners who were in the room and the award winners who were outside the room. And so what we did was we equipped 4 guys with these smartphones and little stabilizer sticks and lights, and they ran around the room to get the nominees. They were all lined up, so you had the 4 of them on the screen, and then the winner would come forward. It was the exact same workflow for the control room, regardless of whether they were 3,000 or 6,000 miles away, or whether they were in the room. And really kind of innovative way of looking at remote production, even when it's local.
That's a great example. I think one of the other fundamental changes is not, and I'll steer away now from remote production, but around the business side of things. So there has been a trend in our industry over the last few years to move away from CapEx and towards OpEx, predominantly around cloud adoption. I'll take this to anybody who wants to answer it. Has that move towards an OpEx-centric model changed, accelerated during the pandemic? Has it rolled back slightly? I'm curious to see. Sure. Take that one.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think it's spot on. There's definitely been a shift from to more OpEx, to more SaaS-based models, to more obviously cloud-based models. I think one of the interesting things too is that for us, we have one of our products is essentially an enterprise software product, and we implement. In the past, it used to be a fairly heavy process. You'd fly the team in, everybody would sit together, you'd figure things out over the course of several days, and then you'd go apart, go on your merry ways and do things. Now, because everything is remote, there isn't sort of that big coming together or anything. So it's not even just sort of like the financial model. It's almost the way the work is done. You're not working in that big blast of CapEx or that big blast of attention anymore. It's just sort of disparate. Now when we do implementations, and we're doing one right now remotely, it just goes as you go. I mean, you come together in some Zoom sessions to get some basic principles, but then connection just happens so quickly. You need to get technology, you need to get the business teams on. it'll happen like immediately, and it just happens constantly. And I think work gets done a lot better, a lot more iteratively, and a lot faster. And I think that for me, that's pretty exciting about how you kind of break down the barriers between parties, to not just between inside companies, but between companies, and everybody just can work a lot more closely together and a lot more constantly. And I think that's more fulfilling.
Thank you. I think the key thing when you're trying to get a customer to reframe themselves between CapEx and OpEx, you can't just make the OpEx system cost the same as the CapEx system spread over time. You actually have to get productivity out of it, or nobody's going to sign up for it.
That's a great point, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe some folks have heard that there's some supply chain challenges, right?
I've heard a story. Yeah.
Obviously that forced a lot of us to reconsider, how we deployed and what type of solutions we were looking for. So what you were traditionally doing with hardware, we had to find examples where we could use software to replace that. You mentioned Zoom meetings. I'll mention the WebEx meetings. So obviously, I think so. Not only the SaaS-based model, but I think it's more around the consumption model, right? So people want to only use what they consume. I think that's what you're trying to speak to. You're utilizing what you need, and I think that's where the model is driving towards. So it's one thing to adopt, a licensing package or a software. It's another thing to figure out what's the run rate of how many of these licenses do we need, or what's the actual subscription base. So I think we're all having to re-challenge ourselves to how do people want to purchase from us. I think that's the bigger story.
Have you seen a similar trend?
Yeah, so it's clear that there is a trend pointing to moving onto an OpEx model. However, something that we have also seen is that, for example, and of course I have to go back to remote production, okay, but when you are moving into an cloud-based remote production with real at-home production and your production happening in the cloud, the content still has to reach the cloud somehow. Yeah. And there is where pieces of hardware like the ones that we make in Appear are still a key and really needed. So I don't think it is immediate that is all OpEx or all CapEx. Another thing we've seen is that companies that moved onto OpEx models, maybe because those business models were not really made for the purpose of that application, they are rolling back to CapEx and coming to us to change the approach.
100%. And I've had conversations where people have said, we moved X to the cloud, but we moved Y to a hybrid, and we're going to move A and B to the cloud, but we might move C to in-house. That fluidity, I think the pandemic has made conversations about fluidity and agility more acceptable. There isn't a right way to do everything. Larry, you guys remember trendsetter.
Yeah, I think what the pandemic did was it caused people to have to innovate. In order to survive, you have to innovate. And as soon as you get to a place like that, you are willing to take chances that you weren't willing to take before. Yeah. The trick now is to take that innovation that you had and find a way to get it to a mature state so that you can get the next level of innovation on top of it. You have to sometimes, take a step back from the 10,000 foot view, take a look at what you did, yeah, and then say, okay, this got us to where we are. Where do we need to be in a year? Where do we need to be in 2 years? And what kind of platform do we need in order to get to that?
Like you've read my question list. So let's talk a bit about what it's not a phrase that I love, but the new normal. What we've learned and where we're going to be now. What is, NAB show is wonderful, great to be back, but what does the new normal look like over the next 2 to 3 years? Whoever wants to.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a funny thing, right? I mean, like, amongst other things, we all talk about, is your office going hybrid? Are you going 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 1 day a week? But, as soon as you're not always there, or most of the time there, you're in this model of sitting in your office on a WebEx.
Yeah, one at a time. Just get customers one at a time.
There you go, all day long. So, how what's the utility of that, right? What becomes the utility of that? What is work like, in person about at that point? And do you get together once a week and everybody's just there once a week? So it's I don't think it's settled yet. I don't think people know what they're going to do.
What does new normal look like?
So I think that the industry has to get to a place where it's comfortable in its own shoes. The world is changing in terms of where production is going, how it's being distributed, and that means new methods for content creation. Remote production is here to stay, there's no question about that, and the question is getting that remote production to a place where your teams are being really, really highly efficient. And that's what we're doing at VCC. We're solving that problem. And you know, you've mentioned WebEx a couple times. I have to mention VCC. And the truth of the matter is that the solutions that are available are not necessarily mature enough yet. And I encourage everybody to look around and find what is going to work for their teams.
Absolutely. And also, you're right, it's not a one hat fits all. There are certain scenarios where solution A is perfect, solution B is just better for a particular customer or a scenario. Todd, I mean, what does the new normal look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think we're all still defining what that new normal is, and I think to your point, we have to continue to innovate. And I think what we're looking for, just as an industry as a whole, is how do we cooperate together, right? And how do we learn from each other, and how do we build those deeper integrations to work together for, you know, specific examples, use cases, what that may be. And so I think it's really challenged, especially in my collaboration. We mentioned Zoom a couple times at WebEx, right? But, you know, obviously competing, but also working together to give the end users, you know, the power to decide. It might be this platform today, it might be this platform tomorrow, we might be using this device. We all need to work well together because we understand there's not one platform or one solution that's going to be one size fit all for everybody. So I think it's forcing us to work together and integrate together.
And Xavier, remote production is here to stay. We're never going to go back to having to roll trucks to every single event. But what does remote production 2.0, 3.0 look like to you?
Yeah, so we are clearly seeing a big push of the industry to move on to cloud workflows. So I think cloud production or remote production in the cloud maximizes the benefits of the remote production. You can get redundancy of talent. You can have your talent at home. You can have the best talent. You can actually choose it. You can select your best talent wherever he sits. You don't need to have it geographically in the place you're producing. So that is definitely something that we are seeing. And the other one is agreeing very well with Todd. I think the industry is shifting into a much more open, collaborative approach within vendors that historically or in a different time would have been much more close to have your own end-to-end locked-in solution and not a more open approach.
And customers don't want lock-in anymore.
Exactly.
They don't. So we are nearly out of time. We do have enough time for a few questions from the audience. There's a gentleman just there. We'll get you a microphone, sir. Just be 1 second.
Thank you. This is for Todd and for Larry. Your two organizations apparently handle the video remotes for 2 of the 3 major television news operations in the U.S. What during the pandemic were the problems, and what did you learn, and how did you provide solutions to those problems? Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, I'll be happy to take that. I think the biggest challenge for us was we could only control a portion of that feed, right? And that's what was happening in the production facility. So as we brought remotes on, whether that was an anchor sitting in their house, whether that was somebody from the general public, from the breaking news story, that bandwidth constraint became problematic, right? And so we had to look at our own application and figure out, could we compress that, right, to where we could still give a video feed at something that was high quality enough to put on air. I would say that's the biggest challenge. And again, we had to go back and look at WebEx as the platform and the application to make sure that we could compress that enough, still give good quality video, but also be able to operate in the more low bandwidth environments.
Our customers had the same kind of experience, and the issue was that you don't control the bandwidth or the device at the end. You don't control the person, you don't control the bandwidth, you don't control the device, but you need to get a really good high quality signal back. How do you do that? And so our customers were struggling with that, and in particular the news customers, we're spending way too much time setting up those feeds. And what our tools do is they actually go out, they query the bandwidth at the site, they query the device that's being used there, and they give the producer the opportunity to decide how we're going to connect before the connection is made. So even before that first conversation, you know whether I'm going to have a discussion about bandwidth and setup, or I'm going to ready to go right to lighting and framing, and optimizing the solution to what the bandwidth is available is actually a really helpful thing.
Okay. It's a great question, sir. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the floor? I have one last question, but if there's any more questions from the floor? So I have one final question for all of you. Hindsight is 2020. I mean, it is. If you had to give a piece of advice that you've learned over the pandemic, and I say this praying it doesn't happen, but for the potential next incident that affects us on a global basis, start with you, Mike. What would that one piece of advice be?
Oh, I mean, I think it's really that you can't underestimate the what human contact gives you, and you've got to find a way to replace it. And I think the way to replace infrequent human contact is just a lot more frequent web access. I mean, you just have to be just in contact and completely transparent to all your partners in the business and partners internally, and that's all you can do.
Transparency is a great one. Larry.
I would say actually plan ahead. So everybody, especially in the news business, but also in our sports and entertainment folks, everybody's focused on what they're doing today or in the next week or week after. Take a small amount of your bandwidth, spin it off into some innovation, some stuff that's next generation that may not affect air today, but will set you up should there be another pandemic, should be something, God forbid, worse than what we just experienced. Take a little bit of resources and plan for the longer term future. Manage short, manage long.
And there were great organizations in our industry that had been doing that for a number of years who really reaped the benefits when the transition happened.
Absolutely.
Great point.
Yeah, I would say reimagine what's possible. I mean, challenge your vendors, challenge your partners, challenge the technology makers to continue to innovate with you. Our best learnings come from our customers, and when customers have demands that maybe we don't necessarily have the exact product or exact solution, challenge us to continue to grow and continue to invest and continue to innovate our products to serve you. I mean, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, completely agree. I would have said something similar that the pandemic has taught us showed us that there is technology out there, and we are technology vendors that are innovating, but we want to do this together with our customers. Yeah. So there to try, there to challenge us, there to test our stuff, and let's develop together. That's to the customers, the message to the customers, and then to the other technology vendors sitting here, be much more open for cooperation, because I think that's the future of this industry.
I completely agree. I think openness is the key. I'll add one thing. It's the last day I get to speak my opinion. I think the thing I would say to people is be honest. And I mean that in its most brutal sense. Be honest with your staff about what the situation is. Be honest with your clients and customers about what degradation of service is likely to happen, and be upfront about it. I think there were instances where some suppliers and vendors were very honest, and it maybe it was seen as a negative, but after 1 year in and 18 months in and 2 years in, the companies that were honest and upfront on day one, they were forgiven. The guys who weren't 2 years down the line, I think the grudges are held. But anyway, so that was a very good panel. Thank you for all of your honesty and candor. Let's thank them all with a big round of applause.
Thank you.